Hey, everybody, tune in to Recent Tartarians.
Recent Tartarians. Recent Tartarians.
Outages across the region. Fox 26 reporter Ivory Hecker is live in Montgomery County to take a look at that aspect.
Thanks, guys. That's right. Before we get to that story, I want to let you, the viewers, know that Fox Corp has been muzzling me to keep certain information from you, the viewers. And from what I'm gathering, I am not the only reporter being subjected to this. I am going to be releasing some recordings about what goes on behind the scenes at Fox because it applies to you, the viewers. I found a nonprofit journalism group called Project Xirtus. It's going to help put that out tomorrow, so tune into them. But as for this heat wave across Texas, you can see what it's doing to AC units. This one broken down as we speak.
Ivory Hecker, you're looking lively this evening. How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Well, we've been looking into the journalism thing, and I hate to make such a pun. I also have kind of an international audience. Maybe you could explain a bit about your background as a journalist.
Yeah, I have a 9-year corporate news career. I left Fox last summer due to growing corruption within the company and inability to actually cover facts on the ground. So I called them out live on air, and now I've created my own news company, and it's really great to be able to cover whatever I want. And so I'm circling back to cover those stories that Fox refused to allow the people to hear, even though they needed to.
It's crazy some of the things you've covered since then. Out of Fox, I'd give you 10 for style, the way you revealed everything so quickly. And then the amount of stories that we've heard, so many one-sided versions and very single-dimensional versions of these stories. Jake Angeli, for instance, you did an interview with Q Shimon, and I mean, things like that have been really revealing what's really going on.
Yeah, well, it's just stating to see that actually there's 3 journalists that were killed in the past week. One was Ukrainian and 2 were American. And then 2 Americans injured just in the conflict outside of Kiev. And it's sad to see unarmed journalists who are just out there trying to tell the truth about what's going on in Ukraine, and they're getting gunned down. And now there's conspiracy theories about whether Ukraine or Russia did it, but it's a tragedy. And I don't think Biden's even addressed the loss of his own American lives, which is highly disrespectful to these journalists.
I'm going to pull up an article. Let me see if this is accurate at all. For 2 days, 1 dead, 2 injured, journalists in Ukraine, and started talking about several journalists who've died. What do you know about the story? What's the official narrative?
First, it was last Sunday that we heard about Brentrenaud, a freelance journalist who's working on a documentary about the humanitarian crisis out there. We hear that he gets shot, and then his colleague, another freelancer who was wearing a Telemundo. He was wearing a Telemundo lanyard in the video of him in the hospital. You can see how this news broke is someone put these photos of his body out on Twitter, which was so jarring, but he was literally, his vehicle was fired upon. They were, according to news reports, suburbs of Kiev, capital city of Ukraine. And his car gets fired upon as he's in a carload of journalists. And according to his colleague who survived but was shot, he said that they got separated in the gunfire, which was a little confusing to me. If they were in a car, how did Brent end up lying on his back on the ground alone and the carload takes off without him? But regardless, it's very horrible. So someone tweeted out his body, his passport, and his press ID, which said New York Times. I guess he's reported for them in the past, but he was not reporting for them at that time. So that happened in one suburb, and then around an hour away in another suburb of Kiev. The following day, another group of journalists gets fired upon, and this time it's a Fox News crew accompanied by a Ukrainian producer who was helping translate. This 24-year-old producer named Alexandra Kuvshinova. Those Eastern European names are tough. So she died along with Pierre Zakrzewski. I know I'm not saying his last name right. And then Benjamin Hall was injured. So according to the Ukrainian government, Benjamin Hall lost part of his leg. Yeah, Ukraine's Ministry of Defense. Looks like Fox News is not even saying that. I don't know how it works for Fox News. He's since been brought back to the US, but I think they're respecting his privacy. The last thing he and his family probably want is just be gossiped about. Although staying silent about someone's horrible injury and his colleague's death is also disrespectful. Do their lives matter? Why isn't Biden talking about the loss of the lives of his own countrymen when he said he had previously told Putin, basically, you better not hurt the lives of my American citizens? He said something like, if Russia targets Americans in Ukraine, we will respond forcefully. So 2 Americans have now died in the past week. Is he going to respond forcefully? That's what Ukraine is asking. So my conspiracy theory in all this is, did Ukraine kill the American to get America involved? Ukraine wants America involved as much as humanly possible. They can't do it alone. So America has sent weapons, but Ukraine would love some boots on the ground. And that's what Biden's not willing to do.
Other alternative theories, do you think that maybe the journalists saw something going on that was not following human rights or Geneva War Convention rules on the side of the Ukraine, even perhaps, and that they were trying to cover tracks? It's completely conjecture, but is that a possibility?
Yeah, that could definitely be a possibility as well, because about the same time that the Fox News journalists were killed, the mayor of that city that they were killed in banned journalists.
It's crazy that the journalists are being banned, and yet we're seeing a bunch of tweet footage of Donbass Russian families on the ground with Azov battalions overhead and things that just are against the general rules.
Yeah, it's the city of Irpin. I'm bringing it up now because I forgot. City of Irpin in Ukraine. I believe that is the city where the Fox News crew members were killed. And the mayor then bans journalists from going through. And the reason he said he did that was because journalists in their coverage were actually outing some tactics that Ukrainians were using. The mayor was arguing that Ukrainians were concerned that America was giving away their tactics to the Russian forces. And so he said, let's just shut them all out. So was it the Ukrainians who opened fire on these guys? And my question is, does anyone know in these war zones, even if Ukraine did open fire on these journalists, did they know that they were firing on journalists?
You said that one of them had a Telemundo
lanyard. Yeah, but they were in a car. So was their car marked properly as it was driving along? My understanding from what corporate news is reporting is that that area of Kiev is where there's a lot of open fire right now. So it's not surprising that someone would get hit by gunfire, because there's gunfire a lot in that region.
The morning press conference, the White House, Jen said, I also just wanted to note that the news we heard from the CEO of Fox this morning, that cameraman Pierre Zakrzewski lost his life. He is someone who has served in many war zones over the course of time. He was a war zone photographer who covered nearly every international story for Fox News, from Iraq to Afghanistan to Syria during his long tenure working there. So our thoughts, prayers are with his family, with the entire community as well. That's basically the entire statement and sentiment that we're hearing out of DC right now. Is there more that they're not saying, and why?
It's good that Psaki at least made mention of it, but on Tuesday, Jackie Heinrich from Fox News tried to ask Biden directly, and he ignored her and just kept shaking hands when she tried to ask him about the deaths of Americans in Ukraine. This was one day after the Fox News crew got fired upon, and 2 days after the freelance crew got fired upon. And a lot of the media too has stayed low key about this. There's been leaders of nations like Boris Johnson and Emmanuel Macron offering their condolences to the US, but our own president and a lot of the American media, I mean, it is getting covered, but to have 2 carloads of journalists hit in 2 days' time, and there are American crews, that's major news. And Biden is staying low key about this because he really doesn't want to escalate this into having to put boots on the ground. The more he talks about Americans getting killed, the more he's gonna have to prove that he really cares about them by putting some boots on the ground out there. And look, I think most Americans do not want that. We don't want our soldiers out there in someone else's war.
Just looking at Afghanistan and even how Biden handled the leaving of Afghanistan, do you feel that's something that we're worrying about with the American influence, or is America trying to avoid an Afghanistan conflict, or do we look at this even like that?
I know the media wants everyone to believe that everyone believes that Russia is a horrible, evil country, which I think most people do believe that, and that they unjustly invaded Ukraine for who God knows what reason, and Ukraine is just trying to stand up for itself. It's so interesting because I had a Russian friend on my podcast just before this, and she lives in America now, but she's from Russia, and she was pointing out that look, Putin was just following America's lead in just defending these groups. Lugansk and Donetsk in the eastern portion of Ukraine were getting unfairly treated by the rest of Ukraine, and at times violence enacted against them unfairly. So Russia was just coming in to protect those guys. Well, that's the Russian narrative. And if you look at what the US has done around the world, the US does that all the time. Most recently, the same week that Russia invaded and bombed Ukraine, US dropped a bomb on Somalia. New York Times reported that on the day of Russia's invasion. Of course, none of the TV news media covered it because they were all hands on deck on Ukraine. But little do people know that America dropped a bomb on Somalia that same week. So we're out here dropping bombs on other countries. We're doing it all the time. And the US argument about Somalia was, well, we're just targeting militant al-Shabaab, which is unfairly treating the rest of Somalia. And so basically Putin is using that same narrative. Well, we're defending against militant Nazi Ukrainians who are unfairly treating Donetsk and Lugansk. I have a hard time pronouncing those words. Eastern European words are not my forte.
Have this conflict where Eastern Ukrainians who are Russian nationals, they're saying that they've been ethnically oppressed, that there's these groups of ethnic cleansing battalions or gangs really that are associated with the paramilitary or the real military. And Russians are, as you said, they're presenting the same narrative that we're hearing, but in Russian. So they're saying the Russians have Chechens or Muslims that were working together with the Chechens to try to protect this group of a republic they're calling the Donbass. So it becomes really difficult. How are we supposed to define or divide between those two narratives?
When I see a region getting bombed, I'm against bombings. I'm against bombings, period. So I'm against Russia bombing Ukraine. Am I against America bombing Africa? Probably. Why are we dropping bombs in Somalia? And our American military narrative is that, look, it's targeted on this particular little building where al-Shabaab was up to monkey business, and we promised that no civilians were hurt. Well, Russia's doing a similar narrative, like we're not targeting civilians, but as we find out from boots on the ground in Ukraine, that civilians are getting hurt. So what about boots on the ground in Somalia? Unfortunately, there's not as many boots on the ground. How many civilians is America accidentally hurting in Somalia? How about let's just stop dropping bombs?
It might be a strategy. I'm interested. I would like to see how it goes. So, okay, in terms of journalism, though, so I just talked to a friend of mine who is in the Ukraine right now. It sounds like it's a nightmare over there. Are you following any journalists? Who do you think, or who do you trust?
I think the journalists who are actually on the ground there, I can see what they're seeing and trust that they are conveying what they're seeing. I think the people who are in the war zones are just trying to show and tell. That's all they can do, is show and tell. My friend Trey Yangst from Fox News is on the ground there. He's been in a lot of war zones. So he was right. He has a photo of him in between the Ukrainian journalist and his Fox News photographer from like the day prior. And it's just crazy to think that those two people on his sides are now dead. But Trey is okay. Thank God. Fox has quite a few people out there. But I've just been looking at Trey's Instagram and seeing him walking through rubble and stuff. And you can find Trey Yinkst at Trey Yinkst on Instagram. But so I think I trust him to show what he's seeing, and he's making as many connections as he can. But when you try to get to the truth of the big picture of why this is even occurring in the first place, that's where it gets really hard. Of why is this occurring, and how can it end, and how was this really instigated? Different sides are pointing fingers at each other. And that's the hard part, is when you get to the tip top, and will we ever find an answer? And a lot of us think that, why did this start even to begin with? A lot of us feel that it's a distraction from something. Yes, the war is real and bombs are being dropped, but why did it start now? Was it to distract from something else that's going on?
So you were talking about Somalia. I know there's things going on in Yemen. What are some of the things that are in the other hand?
It's interesting that China is freaking out about COVID at the same time that this is all going down. And I'm seeing very little news about anything other than Ukraine. Meanwhile, China just locked up 51 million of its people. I say locked up, but they commanded their citizens to stay inside. China gave a stay-at-home order to 51 million of its citizens because of COVID. As it turns out, it was only a few thousand new cases of COVID out of the millions and millions of people there. Sub-variant called something like BA.2 or something, some sort of like Star Wars R2D2 name, but it's a sub-variant of Omicron. It's supposed to be more contagious, 1.5 times more contagious. That's the narrative. Do we believe any of that? I don't know what to believe anymore.
Well, it's interesting you brought up China, because of course, while we're waiting for Ukraine to resolve, China is being quietly, I don't even quiet's the word, trying to go to Taiwan. And you look at the schedule and the maps of amphibious assaults, May is the best time. We're so close to when they would want to go. Are they upset at Russia for stealing their thunder? Who knows? But I think that China might be locking up in preparation for any sort of attack.
That could be locking down their people in preparation for an attack. But some people in America think, if you look at how the first wave of the pandemic happened, because they're saying this is the worst, American media reports are saying this is the worst outbreak of COVID in China in 2 years, which, if it's only a few thousand, that really raises my eyebrows. Wait, that's as bad as it ever got in China? Nevertheless, if you look at 2 years ago when the pandemic started, it started in China. Everyone here was fine. And then a few months later, all hell breaks loose here. So some Americans are theorizing, is this the same narrative just being played over again? Maybe this has to do with Taiwan. Maybe it just has to do with recycling the same pandemic narrative. And in a few months, all hell's going to break loose here, and we're all going to be locked back down in our houses again.
That's a pretty fair prediction. So I would do a disservice not to think about the biolabs, though, because the news has shifted from the pandemic to the Ukraine, but China is really excited to find the narrative of COVID manufacturing in the Ukraine.
Actually, the UN Security Council just today called a meeting over at Russia's request. Russia was like, hey guys, can we please do one more meeting about the biolabs, because I think we have some more information. So they brought the documentation forward again, the Ukrainian documents that talked about destruction, of these, whatever they had in their petri dishes. There were some viruses and some bacteria, and they were supposed to get rid of it. And the health minister was giving permission to dispose of it as Russia was invading. So Russia was just bringing this all to light again and saying, look, you guys are saying that they were only researching in these biolabs for public health reasons, but these documents list the Ministry of Defense, not the Ministry of Health, the Ministry of Defense. That's what Russia brought forward today. And the US representative was there as well. And she was like, hold up, you sound like you are citing some chain email from the dark web. It's a crazy conspiracy theory. She poo-pooed it. And he was like, the fact that you're poo-pooing this hard it shows me that you don't even want to actually respond to the points I'm bringing up here. So it was this interesting back and forth between Russia and the US today at the UN Security Council. But the Security Council ruled that, look, you don't really see any hard evidence of bioweapons in those biolabs either.
Even though Russia's able to show connections to the department and the Ministry of Defense in several states.
There's been a group of about 10 Russian scientists who've come forward saying that they've looked at the documents and say that that is not proof of biolabs or of bioweapons. I was reading something right here actually from one of those Russian scientists, Eugene Lewitin. He said the documents from Ukraine are real biolab documents right out of the biolabs themselves that are indeed funded by the US. But he said, quote, they do not imply any development of biological weapons or even the use of particularly dangerous pathogens in the laboratories. The list of destroyed strains published by RIA Novosti and other Russian media outlets contains not a single particularly dangerous strain. The list contains only strains common to microbiological and even more so to epidemiological laboratories, he said. So yeah, they're just saying nothing to see here. But US admits in its own defense threat reduction agency PR videos, these biolabs that the US is funding throughout the world, they're not just in Ukraine.
We've seen like 360 or something so far that they've admitted to.
Wow,
around the world,
I didn't even
around
know
the
that
world.
was that many. But they've been working on these sort of biolabs for 30 years, they said. And some of the biolabs do indeed contain biological weapons, old biological weapons from the Soviet Union era that they have just held on to in these US funded biolabs. And I'm like, why is America holding on to deadly diseases that have been in the past deployed as biological weapons? Get rid of those. But you're holding on to those. And then you're questioning why Russia's freaking out about this biolab. And they're saying that they're hanging on to this biological weapon to test it for preventative purposes, for our health. It's a biological weapon. And the US in its own propaganda video admits to this. US Defense Threat Reduction Agency. Maybe, do I still have that video up? I don't think. You gave me screen sharing capability, right? It's oh, okay, here it is actually. All right, I've got a lot of tabs and stuff, but here here it is. So this video, the guy, it's right over here that this man says this.
The work we do in the biological threat reduction program is complicated, and it's difficult to communicate it sometimes to outside audiences. And I think our adversaries like Russia can take advantage of that with some of the propaganda that they put out.
The Biological Threat Reduction Program is working in 27 countries. We feel this disinformation and misinformation is done just to really exploit divisions.
We've had accusations that some research projects were being used to create threats, not to identify threats and reduce them. Ulterior motives are being injected where none exist.
We've built these capabilities for the partners, their central reference labs for research. They publish everything they do. They invite the international community into their laboratories. They're working on behalf and the benefit of the people of their respective countries.
Kazakhstan, like many of the other republics in the former Soviet Union, had biological weapons. Russian media has attacked the central reference laboratory that was built by the Biological Threat Reduction Program. The laboratory is there to both store dangerous biological pathogens from the Soviet era and to conduct research by Kazakhstani scientists in order to prevent the spread of new biological pathogens.
Work in Ukraine is essential to help safeguard Europe from some of the naturally occurring diseases that could really undermine security across the region. And
so that, I guess that's the biolab in Kazakhstan, but the subtitles are in Ukrainian, and this is actually a PR video for Ukrainians and Americans to see and be reassured that we're not doing anything dangerous with these biolabs. Okay, how is that reassuring that you're not doing anything dangerous.
It's a huge piece of the puzzle then. So now we've got this idea that the Russians and the Americans are both going after Soviet technology, weaponry, and you've got one legitimate reason from both of them is that they're going to need antidotes from the other. So we're right back to the Cold War, right back to being able to say it's his fault that I have to have a sword.
Totally. Yeah, it's the same. Yeah, it's the same sort of blame game. It sucks. It just totally sucks. 6.5 million people have had to evacuate Ukraine so far, is the latest report I'm seeing today. 9,000 people had to flee again today. So it's sad that people are, emptying out of the country into neighboring countries like Poland, and then that the U.S. is funneling, not only the US, but countries around the world are now funneling so much money into Ukraine right now, which is actually angering some Americans, especially when Biden made his announcement on Monday, I believe it Monday or Tuesday. I guess it was Tuesday that Biden made his announcement that, yes, I listened to Zelensky's plea and I'm immediately going to give him millions, hundreds of millions of dollars in mainly weapons, but also a few $100 million in humanitarian aid. And on top of all that, so all of that together is $1 billion that Biden just gave to Ukraine in the past week. He said, on top of that, we're going to be giving more funding for Ukraine's economy. And that's what really annoyed Americans, is because our own economy is suffering. Inflation's going crazy. Gas prices are at this unheard of level, and it's really hurting a lot of people. I polled some of my viewers on, I just put out a question on Instagram. I got hundreds of answers from people. I was just asking, is inflation really affecting you negatively or not? And people are like, oh yeah. And they went into detail about their stories of suffering in the US economy. And so to see Biden act like our economy is great and I'm just going to send a bunch of money to Ukraine to help Ukraine's economy, angered some Americans and said, do we get any say in where our tax dollars go? This is taxation without representation. And so people are getting pretty fed up.
It's crazy to see $7 loaves of bread, also because of Russia's embargo, and then to see $7 gas. But then Venezuela is they're saying we're going to recognize Maduro in Venezuela finally, so they'll take his gas. Have they said what they want to do to the economy in Ukraine? It sounds like we're trying to build a state. What do they want?
Yeah. No, he didn't say. Biden just threw that in there in his press conference as I was watching it. I guess it was Tuesday now. The week blurs together. Biden talked all about Ukraine, mainly about military support, 2 million rounds of ammo, all these things. But at the end, he just threw in, we're going to be sending more aid to help their economy as well. So he wasn't. And then he threw in, while we watch Russia's economy crumble, because our sanctions are really working despite China.
What do you think the sanctions are doing, and what is Russia doing about them, and what's China have to do with that?
Well, the U.S. is allegedly still the biggest economy in the world, but China is right behind them, growing very quickly. And depending on how you gauge it, it can be unclear whether China is beginning to overtake America's economy. It's crazy. China's very powerful economy. And it was just recently at the Winter Olympics that Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin were calling each other best friends. So it's like, and China is the kings of propaganda. So if right now they're taking the stance of like, well, we're gonna step back and be like the grown up in the room mediator and say, guys, everyone, let's just get along. But China's still staying unclear about how much aid they're really giving to Putin. And it's probably pretty likely that China is actually just totally helping out Russia. So if China's giant economy is helping out Russia and collabing even more, then why would Russia be hurt by American sanctions? That's my question. So
keep seeing again with the two sides of the narrative. America says that the American corporations left, and then Russia says they were kicked out. And so you've got these two sides. China, people have been saying if they were going to invade Taiwan, would go through the same economic sanctions that Russia's gone through. But then would that mean that Russia and China would just survive outside in a new economic paradise without the United States petrodollar? Or how capable is the rest of the world to function without the United States?
It does. Any sanctions do hurt the global economy. Ideally, it's great to have just a free market all around. But if we sanction China, every country that sanctions China, I think also hurts themselves, because China is such a powerful economy that we all need China. You look at how many of America's products are from China, it's endless. And Americans are going to be pretty upset about their Apple products and not being able to get their new iPhone anymore and stuff when we lock down our trading with China and we're no longer going to accept any imports from China, when Americans are addicted to Chinese imports. I'm pretty sure probably everything I'm wearing probably came from China. All these American clothing companies, they actually get all the clothing manufactured in China. And so it's endless things. So that would be pretty devastating to Americans if we did a giant sanction on China. So that would suck. We'll see. China is such a big economy itself that it could somewhat self-sustain. Although word was when Trump was in office, he sanctioned China pretty harshly. And the word was that China was really hurting due to that. Trump kept putting that out, which I don't know if that was fully accurate, how badly he was hurting China. But he said he was really hurting China by doing that.
Well, we mentioned the propaganda kings of Russia and China. It would have been right to mention the three kings. America is definitely...
Every leader of a nation wants to put out a narrative that makes them look their best and make them look powerful. But the US is powerful. It really seems like world leaders take us quite a bit less seriously with Biden in power now.
If one of us of the world wanted to try to be a better journalist and also a better critical listener in the audience, what are your recommendations for both of those?
Well, with journalism, it's just to stay curious. And as a listener in the audience, like, stay curious and always try to verify. Verification is the most important thing for trying to get to the truth. And it's also the big headache of it, because it's like the hardest thing right now to verify whether what you're saying is really accurate. So if you can try to pull from polarizing sides and see what everyone's saying and try to find some truth in there somewhere, that can help. And that's why I really enjoyed having a Russian on my YouTube today to see, okay, what's the Russian side saying? Look at what the US side's saying and get some perspective. So yeah, just stay curious and don't fall into groupthink. Groupthink is just such a plague right now on all sides. People want to fit into a group. They want someone to just tell them what to think. And when you fall into that, you end up usually being misled no matter what side you're on.
Commit investigative journalism. I like that. So Ivory Hecker, where can we find more of you? You said your YouTube. What's the link to that?
Yeah. So just search Ivory Hecker on YouTube. I think it's YouTube/user/Ivory Hecker. I've been doing a lot of YouTubes lately. So that's the main thing to find. Although YouTube censors so much that I actually created an uncensored website too, which is now an app that you can subscribe to and just get. It's a video app. It's like a Netflix type app, but it's on your phone or on your TV, and you can watch all of my coverage that YouTube doesn't want me covering.
Wow.
So that one is ivoryhecker.com, just my name, ivoryhecker.com, or search my name in the App Store.
Let's definitely talk soon as the story progresses.
Hey, everybody, tune in to Recent Tartarians.
Recent Tartarians. Recent Tartarians.